The light inside Le Jardin Étoilé spilled across the white tablecloths like liquid gold. This wasn't just an expensive restaurant. It was a fortress of old money, where reservations took 6 months, silence carried status, and every table represented generations of accumulated power. Ayana Mitchell moved through the dining room with the kind of grace that came from years of learning how not to exist. Her steps were precise, deliberate, measured to the inch. The black uniform fit perfectly. Hair pulled back into a neat bun, posture straight, shoulders relaxed. Everything about her appearance was intentional, designed to reassure, not to intrude. Only her eyes betrayed her. Deep brown, intelligent, watchful, eyes that noticed everything and revealed nothing. Ayana was 28 years old. She had worked at Le Jardin Étoilé for 3 years. Every shift followed the same unspoken rules. Be present, but unseen. Anticipate needs before they were voiced. Never make eye contact unless invited. Tonight she was assigned to table 12. The reservation had been made 4 months in advance. Jonathan Caldwell III. The name alone carried weight. Billionaire, hedge fund manager, real estate developer with holdings across 7 countries. The kind of man whose net worth appeared in Forbes articles with a capital B followed by 9 zeros. He sat at the center of the table, 53 years old, silver at his temples, jaw set in the permanent confidence of a man who had never been told no, and never expected to be. His suit was bespoke Savile Row. His watch was a Patek Philippe worth more than most houses. Everything about him whispered power without ever needing to raise its voice. With him were 5 others. 3 men in their 40s and 50s dressed in variations of expensive certainty. Tailored suits, restrained ties, eyes trained on Caldwell as if listening itself were an investment. 2 women wore wealth like a second skin, jewelry that caught the light with practiced precision, dresses that cost thousands, smiles that never quite reached their eyes. Ayana approached with a tray of aperitifs. She set down each glass with practiced care. Champagne for the women, scotch for the men. She moved clockwise around the table, her presence registering with each guest in different degrees of acknowledgement. Some nods, some absences, some glances that passed through her as if she were part of the decor. When she reached Caldwell, he didn't look up. He was mid-sentence talking about a property acquisition in Monaco. His hand moved dismissively as she placed his drink. Not rudely, not overtly, just as if she were furniture. As if the glass had materialized on its own, delivered by some invisible mechanism that didn't require his awareness. Ayana stepped back and waited. Caldwell continued speaking. His companions listened with the focused silence of people who understood that proximity to wealth had its own rules. The zoning took 18 months, Caldwell said. But once you know who to approach, once you understand how these things actually work, he paused to sip his scotch. The rest is just paperwork. Polite laughter circled the table. Ayana remained still, hands folded, standing exactly 3 feet from the table's edge. Professional distance. Hovering was offensive. Disappearing before dismissal was worse. One of the men, angular face, thin lips, a tie pin that probably cost 5 figures, glanced at her briefly, then away. The look was quick, assessing, dismissing. Caldwell set his glass down with a soft clink. He still hadn't looked at her. "We'll start with the lobster bisque," he announced. Not to her, but to the space in front of him. Then the duck, medium rare, if they can manage it properly this time. The qualifier hung in the air like smoke. Ayana's pen moved across her notepad. "Of course, sir, and for the rest of the table." Her voice was professional, neutral, warm enough to be courteous, distant enough to remain part of the background. The orders came in a cascade. Each guest spoke past her as if dictating to an invisible recorder. She wrote everything down with careful precision. When she finished, she looked up, ready to confirm. Caldwell was staring at his phone, thumb scrolling. "Will there be anything else?" Ayana asked. No response. She waited 3 seconds. Professional protocol. Then she began to turn. "Wait." The word stopped her mid-step. Caldwell looked up for the first time. His eyes landed on her. Cold, evaluative, not sexual. Worse. The look of someone calculating value and finding it insufficient. "The wine list," he said. Not a question. A statement of her failure to anticipate. "Of course." Ayana retrieved the leather-bound folio and approached, holding it at the correct angle. He didn't reach for it. Instead, his gaze dropped to her fingers, dark brown against the burgundy leather. Something shifted in his expression, a microscopic tightening at the corner of his mouth. "Just leave it," he said. She placed it on the table. He opened it without looking at her again. His finger traced down the page, stopped, moved on. The gesture was theatrical. Everyone at the table was watching now, careful to pretend they weren't. "The Chateau Margaux 2005, Caldwell said finally. He closed the folio and pushed it aside. "You do have that, I assume?" "Yes, sir." "An excellent choice." "I know it is." Then, casually, "Do you know anything about wine?" The question landed like a blade wrapped in silk. Ayana felt the shift in the room. Conversations nearby continued, but something had changed at table 12. Anticipatory. Hungry. "I know our wine list well, sir," she replied carefully. "That's not what I asked." Caldwell leaned back, one arm resting on the chair, the other holding his scotch. "I asked if you know anything about wine, the regions, the terroir, the character of a vintage." Ayana felt the trap closing. This wasn't curiosity. It was sport. She was meant to stumble, to confirm the assumption he'd already made about her. "I'm familiar with the basics," she said evenly. "The basics." He repeated the words slowly, tasting them. Then he smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Well, that's adequate, I suppose, for this sort of position." The phrase lingered. One of the women shifted uncomfortably. A small movement, but Ayana noticed. Caldwell didn't. "The Margaux," he continued, swirling his scotch, "is known for elegance over power, finesse over force. It's a wine for people who understand subtlety." He paused. "But I wouldn't expect you to know that." The sentence wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was stated as fact. Ayana's fingers tightened around her notepad. "I'll have that brought to the table immediately," she said. She turned to leave. "Actually," Caldwell's voice stopped her again. She turned back, professional smile in place. He was looking at her now, really looking. Head tilted slightly, like someone examining something faintly amusing. "I'm going to make this interesting." The table went silent. "There's been some confusion tonight, with the service." He gestured vaguely, though everything was perfect. Details, small things, the kind you'd expect at this level. Ayana said nothing. "So let's make sure we're clear going forward," Caldwell continued, leaning forward. "I'm going to give you the rest of our order. Very specific instructions." He smiled faintly. "And I want to be absolutely certain you understand them." "Absolutely certain you understand them." "Of course, sir." "Good." Caldwell smiled. Then, without any change in expression, without a pause to signal what was coming, he switched languages. "Je voudrais que vous apportiez le caviar en premier, suivi du foie gras." French. Not casual French. Not tourist French. It was fluid, polished, delivered with the effortless confidence of someone who'd spent summers in Provence and winters in Paris. Someone used to being admired for sounding cultured. Ayana felt every eye at the table lock onto her. Caldwell continued, his voice casual now, almost bored, as if discussing the weather. "Et assurez-vous que le pain soit chaud, pas tiède, chaud. Vous comprenez la différence, j'espère?" Around the table, his guests froze. The two women stared down into their glasses, suddenly fascinated by the way the light refracted through crystal. The men watched with expressions carefully blank, the kind worn by people who knew something ugly was happening and had decided not to intervene. The air itself seemed to change. This wasn't about wine anymore. This wasn't even about service. This was a public execution dressed up as etiquette. Caldwell took another sip of scotch, his eyes never leaving Ayana's face, watching, waiting for the confusion, for the hesitation, for the moment she would have to admit, quietly, humiliatingly, that she hadn't understood a word. "Vous avez des questions?" he asked, eyebrows lifting slightly. "Do you have any questions?" The dining room seemed to hold its breath. A couple at table 9 stopped talking entirely, silverware frozen mid-air. The sommelier near the back wall paused in the middle of opening a bottle, his hands still. Even the soft classical music filtering through hidden speakers felt distant, as if it had been turned down without anyone touching the controls. Ayana stood perfectly still, notepad in her left hand, pen in her right. Her expression hadn't changed. Professional, neutral, present. Inside, her mind was crystalline and calm. She had known this moment would come eventually. Not this exact scenario, not this exact man, but something like it. She had seen the pattern before. The testing disguised as standards, the casual cruelty masked as sophistication, the assumption that her black skin meant limited knowledge, limited experience, a limited world. They always revealed themselves eventually. Ayana looked at Jonathan Whitmore Caldwell III, billionaire power broker, a man whose entire life had been an exercise in never being challenged, and she made a choice. Bien sûr, monsieur. Her voice was quiet, perfectly accented. The vowels shaped with precision that came from years of study, not phrasebook tourism. Je vais m'assurer que tout soit exactement comme vous le souhaitez. Of course, sir. I'll make sure everything is exactly as you wish. The effect was immediate. Caldwell's expression froze. The glass stopped halfway to his lips. His eyes widened, just slightly, barely noticeable, but enough. Behind him, one of the men inhaled sharply before he could stop himself. But Ayana wasn't finished. She continued in French, her tone still professional, still courteous, but now carrying a subtle authority that shifted the balance of the entire room. Pour le caviar, préférez-vous l'ossiètre ou le beluga? She didn't rush. She didn't soften the question. Et concernant le foie gras, j'imagine que vous le préférez poêlé plutôt que sous forme de terrine, étant donné vos sélections précédentes ce soir. For the caviar, do you prefer ossetra or beluga? And regarding the foie gras, I imagine you prefer it sautéed rather than as a terrine, given your selections this evening. She paused, pen poised over her notepad. Et pour le pain, nous avons du levain fraîchement sorti du four il y a moins de 10 minutes. Her French was immaculate. I can ask the chef to prepare something specifically for your table, if you'd like something more particular. The silence that followed was absolute, not just quiet. It was the silence of a world that had suddenly, and violently, tilted on its axis. The kind of silence that comes when everyone in a room realizes, at the same moment, that they've just witnessed something they weren't meant to see. At table 9, a woman's fork slipped from her fingers and clattered softly against her plate. She didn't pick it up. The sommelier stood completely still now, bottle suspended in his hands, eyes fixed on table 12. Even the kitchen doors, normally swinging with constant rhythm, had gone motionless. Caldwell sat frozen. The glass was still suspended mid-air. His face cycled through expressions too quickly to fully register. Shock, confusion, something that might have been embarrassment, before settling into a mask of rigid control. But his eyes betrayed him. Wide, calculating. They darted briefly to his companions, then back to Ayana, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle that had suddenly become far more complex than anticipated. The blonde woman to his left, early 50s, necklace worth 6 figures, was staring at Ayana with an expression that mixed surprise with something close to respect, or perhaps recalculation. One of the men cleared his throat softly. The sound felt deafening. Ayana waited, pen still poised, expression unchanged, professional, patient, giving him space to respond. She could see it now, the microscopic cracks in his composure, the tightness in his jaw, the faint flush creeping up from beneath his collar. He had fired a weapon expecting no resistance. Instead, it had ricocheted back with surgical precision. Finally, Caldwell set his glass down. The movement was controlled, but his hand wasn't entirely steady. The beluga, he said. English now. His voice was quieter than before. And yes, sauté. Excellent choice, sir. Ayana switched back to English seamlessly, making a note. I'll have the kitchen prepare everything exactly as you've specified. She looked up then, meeting his eyes directly for the first time with clear intent. Was there anything else you needed clarified? The question was perfectly polite, perfectly professional, and absolutely devastating, because they both knew what she was really asking. Do you want to try that again? Caldwell's mouth opened, closed. His fingers drummed once against the table, a nervous gesture he immediately stopped. No, he said finally. That will be all. Wonderful. I'll have your first course out shortly. Ayana gave a small, professional nod to the table and turned away. Her pace was unhurried, confident, the same measured steps she'd used when approaching, but she could feel every eye in the dining room tracking her movement. By the time she reached the kitchen doors, conversations began to resume, carefully, tentatively, the way people talk after witnessing a car accident. She pushed through into the kitchen, letting the door swing closed behind her. The heat hit first. Industrial stoves at full burn. The scent of searing meat, reducing sauces, fresh bread. Marcus, the sous chef, glanced up from a row of plates he was garnishing. "You good?" "Fine," Ayana said, steady. "Table 12 needs the beluga and the foie gras. And they'd like fresh bread, hot." "Caldwell being an asshole?" "When is he not?" Marcus snorted. "He tried that French thing again, didn't he? Word traveled fast in kitchens. Always had." "He did." "And?" Ayana allowed herself the smallest smile. "I managed." Marcus shook his head, turning back to his plates. "Rich people, man." Ayana submitted the order, checked her other tables, and took a moment to breathe. Her hands were steady. Her mind was clear. But a thin thread of tension ran beneath everything now. She knew how this worked. Men like Caldwell didn't accept humiliation gracefully, especially not in public, especially not from someone they'd already decided was beneath them. This wasn't over. Checked that everything was to their liking and withdrew to a respectful distance. Caldwell didn't look at her. He focused intently on his food, knife and fork moving with mechanical precision, cutting, lifting, chewing as if the act itself required his full concentration. His companions had resumed conversation, but it sounded wrong, strained, uneven, like actors who'd forgotten their lines and were improvising badly. The blonde woman kept glancing at Ayana when she thought no one was watching. Not with hostility, with something more complicated. Curiosity, perhaps. Or the uneasy recognition that the person standing a few feet away didn't fit the role she'd been assigned. 20 minutes later, Ayana returned to clear the plates. "How was everything?" she asked. "Fine," Caldwell said without looking up. She collected the dishes efficiently, stacking them on her forearm with practiced ease. The plates were still half full. He'd barely touched his food. When she turned to leave, his voice cut through the air. "Actually," there it was. Ayana turned back. "Yes, sir?" Caldwell was leaning back in his chair now, scotch glass in hand again. He'd refilled it at some point. His posture was casual, but something in his expression had hardened. The faint amusement was gone. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, "about your French." "Sir?" "It's quite good," he said. "Surprisingly so." He took a sip of scotch. "Where did you learn it?" The question was wrapped in politeness, but Ayana heard the blade beneath it. "How could someone like you possibly know French that well?" "I studied it in school," she said simply. "Which school?" The follow-up came faster, sharper. Around the table his companions shifted. One of the men suddenly became fascinated with the stem of his wine glass. The blonde woman's eyes moved between Caldwell and Ayana like someone watching a slow-motion collision. "Georgetown," Ayana replied calmly. Silence. Then Caldwell smiled, thin, incredulous. "Georgetown University?" "Yes, sir." "Interesting." He swirled his scotch. "And what did you study there?" Ayana could see the trap clearly now. Each question was designed to erode credibility, to expose a crack, to prove that despite what everyone had just witnessed, she didn't belong in the conversation she'd dominated minutes earlier. "International relations," she said, with a focus on European economic policy. The blonde woman's eyebrows lifted slightly. Caldwell's jaw tightened. "And yet," he said slowly, "you're working as a waitress." There it was. The real question. How does someone with a Georgetown degree end up serving me? The implication was unmistakable. Either she was lying, or she was a failure. "I'm working as a server," Ayana corrected gently. "And yes, sir, I am." "That seems—" He paused, as if searching for a word generous enough to disguise the insult. "Unfortunate, given your education. I enjoy my work. Do you?" It wasn't a question. It was disbelief sharpened into accusation. "You enjoy bringing food to people who actually use their degrees?" "Jonathan," the blonde woman began. He waved her off without looking. "I'm just curious," he continued. "It seems like a waste. 4 years at Georgetown, probably hundreds of thousands in student debt, and you're—" He gestured vaguely at her uniform. "Here." The weight of attention in the dining room intensified. Tables 9 and 11 had abandoned all pretense of conversation. Even the arguing couple at table 8 had fallen silent. "Student loans are manageable," Ayana said evenly, "and I preferred this to several other options I had." "Such as?" The word landed like a scalpel. "Private sector consulting. Think tank work. NGOs." She said it plainly, without pride, without defense. I chose this instead. Caldwell leaned forward slightly. You chose to be a waitress over consulting? He shook his head. No one chooses that. Not if they actually have options. I did. Why? Because I wanted to. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have, sir. Caldwell set his glass down with deliberate care. You know what I think? I don't, sir. I think you're lying. His tone was calm, certain. I think maybe you took a few classes, maybe even finished a semester or two. But Georgetown? A degree? He smiled thinly. That sounds like a story you tell yourself to feel better about where you ended up. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop. At table 9, a man whispered urgently to his wife. The sommelier near the back wall took a step forward, then stopped, unsure whether to intervene. Ayana's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Quick, dangerous. You're welcome to think whatever you'd like, she said quietly. Because the truth is, Caldwell continued, warming to his cruelty now, his voice rising just enough to carry, people with real Georgetown degrees don't end up here. They don't serve food. They sit at tables like this. They build things. They create value. He leaned back. They don't waste their education fetching wine for people who actually matter. The word landed like a slap. One of the men muttered under his breath, Jesus Christ, Jonathan. But Caldwell wasn't finished. So either you're lying about your degree or you failed so completely that this, he gestured at the restaurant, the uniform, her, was the best you could do. He smiled faintly. Either way, it's pathetic. The word echoed. Pathetic. Ayana stood perfectly still, notepad in hand, expression professional. But the energy in the air had shifted, the way it does before a storm breaks. Is there anything else I can get for you, sir? She asked calmly. No. Caldwell waved her away dismissively. Just bring the next course, and try not to screw it up. Ayana nodded once and turned away. Behind her, the blonde woman's voice cut through in a low, furious whisper. What the hell is wrong with you? I'm just saying, you're being a complete ass. The kitchen doors swung closed, cutting off the argument. Of art, garnished with microgreens and edible flowers, sauces painted in precise arcs. Ayana loaded the plates onto a large tray with the help of a junior server. The weight was substantial. China, silverware, food, well over 30 pounds. She lifted it smoothly, balanced on her shoulder, and pushed through the kitchen doors back into the dining room. The lighting felt brighter, or maybe it was just that every eye turned toward her as she crossed the floor. The entire restaurant knew something had happened. They didn't know the details. Most hadn't heard the words, but they'd felt the shift. The tightening of the air, the wrongness that lingered. Table 12 came into view. Caldwell was laughing at something one of the men had said. Too loudly, too quickly. The blonde woman sat stiffly, phone in hand, shoulders tight with restrained fury. The others nodded along, but their expressions were hollow. Ayana approached. Your main courses. She set each plate down with practiced precision. Duck for Caldwell. Lamb for the others. Each placement exact. Balanced, professional. No one said thank you. Caldwell looked down at his plate, then up at her. This is the duck? Yes, sir. Medium rare, as you requested. He picked up his knife and cut into the breast. Pink meat showed at the center. He stared at it for several seconds. Then he looked up again. It's too rare. Ayana felt the trap closing. Sir, you ordered medium rare. The chef, I said medium. His voice sharpened. Not medium rare. Medium. I have the order written down, sir. You specified. Are you arguing with me? His voice cut across the dining room, sharp, loud enough that nearby tables went silent again. Are you seriously standing here arguing about what I ordered? The blonde woman put down her phone. Jonathan, you did say medium rare. I know what I said. He didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on Ayana. I said medium. She heard wrong. Probably because she was too busy showing off her supposed Georgetown education instead of doing her actual job. Ayana's fingers tightened against the tray. I can have the kitchen prepare another duck, she said carefully. It will take approximately 15 minutes. No. Caldwell shoved his plate away. I've lost my appetite. This whole evening has been, he shook his head, unprofessional, incompetent, frankly insulting. I apologize if you feel, I don't feel anything, he snapped. I'm stating facts. He leaned back, assuming the posture of judgment. You've been defensive. argumentative, unable to take simple direction. And now you've ruined my meal. Around the table, no one moved. The blonde woman looked like she wanted to disappear. One of the men stared intently at his lamb, as if it might save him. "Sir, if you'd like to speak with the manager." "Oh, I will." Caldwell pulled out his phone. "In fact, I'm texting him right now." His thumbs moved rapidly. "This is unacceptable," he continued, eyes flicking between the screen and Ayana. "You are unacceptable. I'm going to make sure everyone here knows exactly what kind of staff you employ." He hit send. People who lie about their qualifications, who argue with guests, who can't even get a simple order right. He looked up. "I'm recommending you be fired immediately, tonight, before you embarrass this establishment any further." The words fell like stones. Ayana stood perfectly still, tray balanced, expression neutral, but her eyes had gone somewhere else. Not broken, not afraid, just distant, like someone observing a moment already decided. "I understand," she said quietly. "Good." Caldwell set his phone down. "Now get out of my sight." Ayana turned away. She took 3 steps. "Jonathan." The word was calm, quiet, but it carried authority that turned heads across the entire dining room. Ayana froze. She knew that voice. Everyone at Le Jardin Étoilé knew that voice. From across the restaurant, moving steadily between the white linen and crystal chandeliers, came Marcus Beaumont IV, the owner, the chairman, the man whose family had built this place 50 years ago and turned it into an institution. 72 years old, tall, straight-backed, white hair immaculate, dark eyes that missed nothing. He had been in his private office upstairs all evening, reviewing invoices, wine orders, the invisible work that kept everything running, until his phone buzzed, until he read the message, until he decided to come downstairs. Now he stood 10 feet from table 12, hands loosely clasped, expression unreadable. "Marcus." Caldwell's face broke into a relieved smile. "Automatic. Performative. Perfect timing. We need to talk about your staff." Beaumont didn't smile. He looked first at Ayana, still standing with the tray. "Ms. Mitchell," he said quietly. "Are you all right?" "Yes, sir." "Good." Only then did he turn to Caldwell. "What seems to be the problem?" Caldwell laughed, though the sound was tight. "This woman has been incompetent from the moment we arrived. Wrong orders, defensive attitude, and now she's ruined my meal." "I see," Beaumont said evenly. "How exactly did she ruin it?" "She brought me rare duck when I ordered medium." "You ordered medium rare," the blonde woman said softly. "I heard you." "That's not the point," Caldwell snapped. "The point," Beaumont interrupted calmly, "is that you sent me a message recommending I fire Ms. Mitchell for incompetence and," he glanced at his phone, "misrepresenting her qualifications." Silence. Caldwell's smile faltered. "Yes, that's correct. She claimed to have a degree from Georgetown, which is obviously true." The word landed like a hammer. Caldwell blinked. "Excuse me?" "It's true," Beaumont said. "Ms. Mitchell graduated from Georgetown University with a degree in international relations. Magna cum laude." He paused. "She speaks 5 languages fluently. She's been with us 3 years. And she's one of the most exemplary employees I've ever had." A man at the table whispered, "Holy shit." Caldwell's face drained of color. "But she's a server," Beaumont said. "Yes. But why would someone with that background work here?" Beaumont finished, voice calm, steel beneath it. "Why don't you ask her?" All eyes turned to Ayana. She met Beaumont's gaze, not Caldwell's. "My mother was a server," she said quietly. "She worked at a diner in Baltimore for 37 years, 6 days a week, double shifts. She paid for my education with that work. Every penny she earned went into my education. She wanted me to have opportunities she never had." Ayana paused. "When she got sick, stage 4 pancreatic cancer, I was in my last semester at Georgetown. I had already accepted a consulting position in New York, $60,000 a year. Benefits, the kind of job she had always dreamed I'd get. The dining room was absolutely silent. She died 3 weeks before graduation. I never took that job. I came here instead. Because this," she gestured softly toward the restaurant, the uniform, everything Caldwell had dismissed. "This was her world. This work you called pathetic was how she showed love, how she built my future, and I will never be ashamed of honoring that." Tears streamed down the blonde woman's face. She didn't bother wiping them away. One of the men cleared his throat and looked down. Caldwell sat frozen, pale, mouth slightly open. Ayana turned toward Beaumont. "I'm sorry, sir. I should get back to—" "You have nothing to apologize for," Beaumont said firmly. "Nothing at all." He faced Caldwell now. The pleasant neutrality was gone. What remained was cold, final. "Jonathan, we've known each other for 15 years. You've been a regular here since your first billion." Caldwell's shoulders eased, just a fraction. However, the words stopped him cold. "There is nothing more important to me than the dignity and safety of my staff. They are not servants. They are professionals, and they deserve the same respect you demand for yourself." He stepped closer. "What you did tonight was unforgivable. You attempted to humiliate a woman who showed nothing but grace. You questioned her intelligence, her education, her choices. You called her pathetic. Each word landed with quiet force. You tried to use her race and her position to make yourself feel powerful." Caldwell's face burned red. "Marcus, I'm not finished," Beaumont said calmly. "You then tried to have her fired, to take away her livelihood, because she had the audacity to be more educated and more composed than you." He paused. "That ends now." Beaumont raised a hand. "You are no longer welcome at Le Jardin Étoilé. Not tonight. Not ever. Your privileges are revoked permanently." Silence. Then Caldwell stood, movements unsteady. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are," Beaumont replied. "The question is, do you?" Caldwell grabbed his jacket. "Let's go." They left. All of them. The dining room watched until the door closed behind them. For 3 seconds no one spoke. Then whispers spread. Not loud, not scandalized. Something closer to awe. Beaumont turned back to Ayana. "Why don't you take the rest of the night off? I still have tables. I'll cover them. Go home." She nodded, hands trembling now as the adrenaline faded. "Thank you." "No," Beaumont said gently. "Thank you. And your mother would be very proud." A single tear slipped down Ayana's cheek. She left through the staff exit. 3 days later she returned. The staff greeted her with quiet reverence. Flowers, smiles, respect. In Beaumont's office she learned the truth. Hundreds of messages, guests, strangers, people who had been there, or who had simply heard. Her story had traveled. Opportunities followed. And yet, that night when Marcus offered her table 12 again, she didn't hesitate. "I want it." A young couple sat there, nervous, celebrating something important. Ayana served them with the same calm presence. When they left, they shook her hand. As she cleared the table, she felt it. Not triumph, not revenge, something deeper, dignity. She looked around the dining room once more. This world had shaped her, and now, she had claimed it. Behind her, table 12 was cleared. Then another couple was seated, and the dance began again. Some stories don't end with applause. They end with quiet dignity, and that's louder than anything.